What is the only true pastime of a British man? Drinking a tasty beverage commonly known as tea. This sweetly luxurious activity was developed by a complex web of imperialism, primarily based on oppression. The brewed beverage consists of tea leaves, sugar, and water. Tea and sugar derived from colonies. Britain, being a self-named superior empire, as well as France and the Netherlands, created a global consumer economy during the 18th century. They did this with the sole purpose of benefiting their own nations while bringing down others, further increasing their powers of imperialism. Tea drinking was a crucial instrument of this ideological system. The ingredients came from countries such as India and China. However, the process was much more complex than just obtaining the ingredients. Colonization and trade played a huge role.
During the 18th century, Western powers expanding their influence throughout the world, regulating entire countries and controlling their populations. Those countries, colonies, were essential to the power's economical development, providing a source of raw materials and cheap labor. France took over islands in the Caribbean known as Martinique and Guadeloupe. Both of these islands were sugar producers. To produce sugar in a more efficient way, France created what we call a plantation economy. The plantations were sugar factories held by local people called Creoles, and the Creoles were in charge of the workers who were slaves exported directly from Africa. The sugar was then sent back to France and traded between the European powers. As the demand for sugar would grow in France, the plantations and numbers of slaves would increase. However, France wasn't the only Western power involved in the Creole system, and the competition between the European nations was important. The more colonies the country had, the more fear and power the country posed.
Tea leaves were derived from both India and China. England obtained this ingredient by essentially colonizing India and developing a trade relationship with China through the East India Company. The East India Company was a joint stock company formed to pursue trade with the East Indies, but ended up trading mainly with the Indian subcontinent and King China. England began growing opium in India in exchange for Chinese tea, though the beverage ingredient was grown in both locations. The populations in both greatly suffered. The company eventually began ruling large areas of India with its own private armies, exercising military power, and violently assuming administrative functions. The Chinese became addicted to the dangerous drug. On the bright side, the company, and Britain as a whole, rose to account for half of the world's trade, indulging in the deliciousness of tea.